You know, there's a phrase in the Qur'an that has sparked centuries of debate. It's often been used to justify things that, frankly, feel really out of step with the text's own deep ethical message. It's a phrase many people know, but very few have really investigated using the Qur'an's own internal logic. So today, we're going to put on our linguistic detective hats and see what we can find.
So here it is, Malakat Aymanukum. For a very long time, the go-to translation has been what your right hands possess, and traditionally this has been understood to mean slaves or captives, especially women. But what if that translation, that one simple phrase, is missing a huge, crucial layer of meaning that's right there in the original Arabic?
And that really gets us to the heart of the matter, right? Is this phrase a license for slavery and concubinage, or is it something else entirely? To figure this out, we're not going to look at later interpretations or legal opinions. Nope. We're going to use the Quran's own vocabulary to define its own terms.
All right, so here's our game plan. First, we'll tackle the difficult phrase head-on. Then, I'll introduce you to our main tool, which is basically the Quran's own dictionary. We'll decode the two root words, compare our phrase to another key term, connect it all to 6 major Quranic themes, and then finish up by asking a completely new kind of question.
Okay, let's start with this difficult phrase. The traditional reading, what your right hands possess, well, it immediately sets up a relationship of ownership, of property. And that right away creates some serious ethical tension, doesn't it? I mean, how does that square with all the other parts of the text that are constantly talking about justice, fairness, and freeing people from bondage?
To sort this out, we're going to use a method called Tasreef. Now think of it this way. We're going to use the Qur'an as its own dictionary. Instead of forcing outside definitions onto the words, we're going to see how the Qur'an itself uses and explains its own vocabulary, right across all of its chapters.
Tasreef is really all about cross-referencing. It's a simple but powerful idea. If you want to know what a word truly means, you find every single place it appears in the text and you look for patterns. This lets the text's own coherence shine through, free from the weight of all those later interpretations. We're just letting the book speak for itself.
So, let's get to our first big piece of evidence. We're going to break this phrase down into its 2 core Arabic roots. This is where the investigation really starts to heat up.
The first root is MLK. Now, in the Quran, this isn't just about owning a coffee mug. It's a much bigger idea. It's used to describe a whole sphere of authority, a capacity, a dominion. So God has mulk over the heavens and the earth. That's total sovereign control. A king, a malik, has authority over a domain. So it's really about having something within your sphere of responsibility.
Now for the second root, YMN. And this is where it gets really fascinating. Yes, it can mean right hand. But here's the kicker. Throughout the Quran, its plural form, Ayman, is used over and over again to mean oaths, solemn pledges, and covenants. Verses like 222:4 and 589 are crystal clear. Ayman means oaths you're not supposed to mess around with. This is a huge clue for us.
So, what happens when we put these two meanings together? Not control plus right hands, but control over a domain plus oaths or pledges. What does that equation give us?
And there it is. A completely different meaning just pops out. Instead of what you own, the phrase becomes something like what your solemn pledges or bonds have brought into your sphere of responsibility. This completely shifts the frame from property to a relationship defined by a serious commitment. All right, if you weren't with me before, get ready for what I think is the smoking gun of this entire investigation. It turns out the Quran has a totally different, very specific word it uses when it's talking about people who are actually in a state of slavery or bondage. And when you put them side by side, the difference is just, wow, it's incredibly clear. The Quran uses the term riqab, which literally means necks, when it's talking about people in bondage. And check this out. Every single time riqab shows up, it's in the context of liberating them. Freeing necks is seen as this great act of goodness. But our phrase, Malakat Aymanukum, shows up in totally different contexts: household relationships, intimacy, and covenanted responsibility. The text is treating these as 2 completely separate things. So this just leads to a really powerful question, doesn't it? If the Quran has its own specific word for people in bondage, a category it consistently says should be freed, then why on earth wouldn't it use that word here if that's what it meant? The fact that it doesn't, well, that speaks volumes.
Okay, so let's zoom out a bit and see how this all fits into the bigger picture. Because this phrase, Malakat Aymanukum, it never just floats around on its own.
It's always, and I mean always, found inside this rich network of ethical ideas. We're going to look at 6 thematic keys that pop up every time this phrase does.
So as you can see here, the phrase never appears in isolation. It's always wrapped up in this web of 6 core ethical themes. Just take a second to look them over. You see the pattern, right? All of them: equity, fortification, trust, permission, modesty, and conscious awareness. They all point away from a language of ownership. Instead, they build this really consistent moral landscape of accountability, of mutual dignity, and of personal responsibility.
So, what does this all add up to? Well, what this analysis does is it fundamentally reframes the entire conversation. It moves it away from questions about ownership and puts it squarely in the realm of personal accountability.
Just look at the 2 interpretations side by side. The traditional reading makes you ask questions like, do I legally own them? Or what am I allowed to do? But the text's own framing, as we've seen, it pushes you to ask questions about your character. Can you be equitable? Are you fulfilling the trust that's been placed in you? Is this a protected bond? It's a massive shift from asking about your rights to asking about your character.
Ultimately, what our little investigation shows is that the Qur'an's main concern here isn't about what you are allowed to do to another person. It's about what kind of person you are choosing to be within your relationships and how well you fulfill the solemn responsibilities you've taken on.
And that just leaves us with one final thought to chew on. What changes in our understanding, in our ethics, in our communities, when the basic question flips from what can I take to what am I responsible to give? That change in perspective, well, it seems like that's the entire point.